Well, good morning, as always. It is such a pleasure and a joy and a privilege to be able to speak to you all. I love worshiping with this group, and as Kevin alluded to earlier, I should probably note, if y'all are not aware, this may be my last time with you all because my wife has taken a new job in Dublin, Ireland. And so, since I like my wife, I was planning to follow her there with the girls. So exactly when we leave, we're not entirely sure yet. It'll be a couple of 3 months, maybe longer. I may have to stay behind and tie up some loose ends. So yeah, I don't know. This may be my last time. If I can sneak one more in, I'd love to, especially because I'm in the middle of a sermon series that's been going on for like 10 years now, and I'm so close to the end. Today is part 6 of a 7-part sermon series. So if I can't do the 7th, I'm gonna, like, the OCD inside of me is gonna be like, no, that was bad. But yeah, so today is part 6 of this 7-part sermon series on the Unitarian Universalist 7 principles. So today we will consider the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. I just gotta say, can we add ice cream to that list? If we tack it on at the end, I promise no one will notice. So then, the goal is world community with peace, liberty, justice, and ice cream for all. And while we're at it, maybe add flying rainbow unicorns, fluffy little bunnies wearing bow ties, the everlasting gobstopper, and the Holy Grail. The goal of the 6th principle is ambitious, to say the least. A truly authentic world community in which every single person has equitable access to peace, liberty, and justice. This is a daunting task, especially for Unitarian Universalists, considering that many UU congregations can barely pull off a successful potluck without someone getting upset. To believe that anyone could actually achieve this goal, well, it would take bravado, naivete, maybe a little chutzpah. So maybe a good word to capture the spirit of all those ideas is hope. I think the 6th principle proves that Unitarian Universalism is a faith anchored in and buoyed by hope. Unitarian Universalist theologian James Luther Adams once wrote that hope must be considered one of the key characteristics of liberal religion, which UUism, of course, is an expression of. Liberalism, according to Adams, quote, holds that the resources, both divine and human, that are available for the achievement of meaningful change justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. Ultimate optimism, i.e., hope. But hope is hard. It's a struggle. Every day when I look at this world, my eyes, my ears, and my rational mind, they tell me that we are beyond hope. It is over for us as a human race. We squandered our time on this planet with petty bickering and hurting each other with little remorse, and we are soon to be extinct. Victims of a destruction that we have brought upon ourselves. If I were to be granted the honor of crafting the epitaph for the collective headstone of humanity, I would write that we were a nasty, brutish, selfish, and cruel species whose advancements in technology too quickly outpaced the evolution of our morality, and so we earned our fate. But hope disallows me from believing this. I must believe that in the end, love wins. Even when every other rational and objective indicator suggests otherwise. In other words, my hope is an act of faith. And I must say that this kind of radical human-centered hope is harder than the hope of my old evangelical Christianity from years ago. That frankly was much easier because according to the traditionalist, literalist Christian theology that I was raised in, it ultimately didn't matter what happened in this world or to this world. God was going to scrap this world. The whole thing was going to go up in flames, and then there would be a new heaven and a new earth. But for Unitarian Universalists, the first priority is taking care of this world. So, with unbridled hope, with ultimate optimism, Unitarian Universalists set a goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. So let's unpack that a bit. World community. What on earth, so to speak, would that look like? So here's my nomination. Gene Roddenberry had a vision for the future. In Roddenberry's Star Trek, our world, the Earth, finally comes together to form a real community. Earth achieves peace with itself, and with that peace comes prosperity in a post-capitalist, post-scarcity economic system, which then fuels our ability to advance our technology and propel ourselves into space, the final frontier. And one of the most important aspects of Roddenberry's future utopia, an aspect that makes my little heart sing, is that although the Earth is finally unified, it is not unified through colonization or cultural assimilation. Assimilation, as anyone who is a fan of the Next Generation knows, is one of the great evils of Roddenberry's universe. In Roddenberry's future, unity is achieved instead by embracing diversity. Remember that the crew of that original Enterprise, first depicted on American television screens in the 1960s, included both male and female officers from disparate places like Japan, Russia, Scotland, Kenya, and it included a biracial science officer from the planet Vulcan. Now, the fact that they all answered to an ill-tempered, white, hetero-cisgendered American male prone to acts of sexual harassment and assault of alien species is, of course, beside the point. It was a beautiful utopia, except for that last terrible part. But the problem with all utopias is that they're heartbreakers. We humans have never been able to create a real one, even a small one for any extended time. They are volatile and unsustainable. As it stands right now, our world appears to be light years away from anything Roddenberry envisioned, such that I fear the collective future of humanity looks less like the USS Enterprise and more like the RMS Titanic. But my faith compels me back to hope. And that hope keeps moving me forward no matter what. And imaginary though it may be, a utopic vision like Gene Roddenberry's can act as a North Star to help guide our steps even if we know we may never reach it. I believe the actual path itself to world community lies in the second half of that sixth principle, the path of peace, liberty, and justice for all. So let's take a closer look at those three big, vague, important, and idealistic words. And I'm going to take them out of order. So I'm going to start first with justice, because I think I can kind of move past it quickly. I already defined and addressed justice earlier in this sermon series when we discussed the second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, which was like 14 years ago, I know. But of all the big, vague, important, and idealistic words that run through the seven principles, and there are many, one and only one word appears twice: justice. I cannot believe for a moment that that was some kind of mistake or coincidence. As a religious people, you use thirst for justice. If there is a single word besides love upon which the Unitarian Universalist faith is centered, surely it is justice. And I think the sixth principle rightly implies that there can be no authentic community, worldwide or otherwise, where there is not also justice. Peace, said Tybalt to Benvolio. I hate the word. I hate it too. The word, that is, because the word has so many definitions, so I can never be sure what we're talking about. Of all the big, vague, important, and idealistic words in these principles, I think this one might be the vaguest. Are we talking about peace in the anti-war sense? Well, if so, that's certainly a worthy ideal, particularly these days. Whatever your personal philosophy on the subject may be, whether you are a pacifist or a just war theorist, I think most people of conscience and faith, at least those who are paying attention, would agree that there's too much war in the world today. Too many battles, too much collateral damage, too much needless bloodshed. Sadly, war is one of the very few things that can still foster broad bipartisan support in this country. We're seeing this play out right now in real life in Ukraine. And I just saw it literally 2 days ago while I was visiting Jerusalem and the Palestinian West Bank. The funny thing is, ask just about anyone, and they will tell you that they want peace. And they probably do. Even dictators ultimately want peace after they have used war to expand the borders of their empire or subdue threats against the stability of their markets. There are, of course, some people who want war simply for the sake of war. These would be stakeholders in the sprawling global military-industrial complex, but they're still a statistical minority. So what I'm getting at is, if you took a poll asking people if they like the idea of peace in all of its beautiful abstractness, the numbers, of course, would be astoundingly high. Far higher than you would expect, considering how many wars we're all actually perpetually fighting. So if everybody wants it, why no peace? Now, to understand that, the real questions we need to ask and answer are, how do we achieve peace? What are we willing to sacrifice for peace? And who has the power to decide? Because peace is almost always built on the bones of our enemies. So, who pays for your peace? Now, to answer those questions, I would need another sermon series, like an 85-part sermon series. And that's just like one kind of peace. What if the sixth principle is actually talking about another kind of peace, inner peace? That state of deep serenity, tranquility, and enlightenment that follows an intense experience of ecstasy or transcendence, or is cultivated over time through spiritual disciplines like prayer, meditation, or yoga. That kind of peace, or some interpretation of it, appears in cultures and philosophies and religions all across the world. It may be known as Shanti, Shalom, Salam, Ataraxia, Nirvana, Gelassenheit, self-actualization, the peace that passes all understanding. We could do another 85-part series on that kind of peace as well. But as dissimilar as these two kinds of peace are, perhaps you're thinking like I am, that, there must be some relationship between them. Perhaps the spiritual peace cultivated within the hearts of individuals can ultimately lead to peace between the nations. And if you are thinking that, well, you're in good company. Such a causal relationship has been suggested by several noted thinkers, from the Dalai Lama to Lao Tzu. There are these that I've just mentioned, these are two very worthy conceptualizations of peace as it relates to the sixth principle. But there is a third understanding of peace that often gets thrown around in these kinds of conversations. It is a superficial kind of peace that is often cited as a goal for an equally superficial kind of spirituality. This faux peace prizes the absence of any kind of discomfort, struggle, or conflict. It exalts intra and interpersonal harmony and a lack of any turbulence as the universe's highest moral good. It is a facile and tragically shallow understanding of the word peace, almost as facile and shallow as defining love as warm, fuzzy feelings, or, being nice to everyone. To achieve true peace, sometimes we have to blow up that faux peace. Certainly, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. thought so. In 1955, during the Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. King was accused of disturbing the peace. Ironic? Instead of disputing the charge, he responded with the famous words, "True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice." A so-called peace that perpetuates oppression by coercing victims and activists to stop rocking the boat is no peace at all. Dr. King's statement forces us to recognize that there is sometimes an inverse relationship between peace and justice. And whichever kind of peace we're talking about, avoidance of military conflict, spiritual tranquility, or even interpersonal harmony, it behooves us to ask ourselves, just how much peace are we allowed to enjoy when there is still so much injustice in the world? Or to put it another way, just how much injustice are we willing to suffer in order to keep the peace? We are left to discuss liberty. I don't have enough time to do the subject justice, especially because liberty, like, the other big, vague, important, idealistic words, it can mean so many different things. Spiritually speaking, it can denote the ability to act freely, unencumbered by one's fears and desires. Politically, it can mean the freedom to act without state coercion, or the actual ability or agency to act as one wishes, which would require that certain basic economic conditions be met for all people. It should also encompass the ability to act free from the invisible influence of corporations and billionaires. Very broadly speaking, then, three great threats to liberty are personal desire, the state, and the capitalist class. For liberty to prosper, all three must, at the very least, be tempered. As it relates to socio-political liberty and freedom from oppression, I find the following excerpted words from MLK's Nobel Peace Prize address to be valuable. These words were spoken in 1964, but I believe they are just as applicable today. At least, that is my earnest hope. Dr. King said, "What we are seeing now is a freedom explosion. The deep rumbling of discontent that we hear today is the thunder of disinherited masses rising from dungeons of oppression to the bright hills of freedom. The great masses of people are determined to end the exploitation of their races and land. They are awake and moving toward their goal like a tidal wave. You can hear them rumbling in every village street, on the docks, in the houses, among the students, in the churches, and at political meetings. These developments should not surprise any student of history. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself. The Bible tells the thrilling story of how Moses stood in Pharaoh's court centuries ago and cried, 'Let my people go.' This is a kind of opening chapter in a continuing story. The present struggle in the United States is a later chapter in the same unfolding story." As we've discussed a great deal today, this sixth principle has many big words, but I would argue the most important words are the two small ones that appear at the very end. For all. As Dr. King reminds us, we are, each of us, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We live in a nation in which, as a people, we have made the political decision to allow homelessness to exist, to allow 70,000 Americans to die every year because they don't have health care, to allow the average white family to own 10 times the wealth of the average black family, to allow our military to drop an average of 46 bombs a day on other countries over the past 20 years, to allow our government to use our tax dollars to give the Israeli military over $10 million a day to occupy Palestinian land and establish an apartheid state. We have so much work to do in our very own backyard. And when we recognize this truth, I believe our faith compels each of us, as the Christian apostle Paul put it, to work out our own salvation with fear and trembling. Because we, the relatively privileged, we bear our chains as well. And as civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer once observed, nobody's free until everybody is free. Amen, and blessed be.